Welcome to Evidence for the Resurrection. This is part 3. I want to do a quick review first. We are celebrating what I call Resurrection Week. That goes from Palm Sunday right through to Resurrection Sunday when Jesus was risen from the dead. And so far, we've looked at 3 of the arguments or the evidence for believing that the gospel writers were telling the truth about the resurrection. Number 1, we looked at embarrassing stories. And in embarrassing stories, the argument is that if the writers were willing to tell the truth about all of their most embarrassing moments that made them look really bad, and there was a lot, then it's a lot easier to believe that they were also telling the truth about everything else, including the resurrection of the dead. The second argument, excruciating deaths, is that no one would willingly die an excruciating death for something that they knew was a lie. So they must have believed that they were telling the truth and not lying when they say, I saw Jesus rise from the dead. Third thing we looked at already is radical change of theology. Concerning after the resurrection of Jesus, the disciples, all of whom except for Luke, were faithful Jewish followers, they began to teach things that were radically in contradiction to what Judaism taught. And every one of these teachings was considered a heresy, and it was punishable by stoning, by death. And why would the disciples have taught these new things, knowing they were risking their lives, unless they were convinced that Jesus had told them the truth and that he'd risen from the dead? Okay, so today I want to look at some more convincing evidences or arguments. First one I called cold case analysis. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. Okay, so J. Warner Wallace is a cold case homicide detective, and he's renowned for solving homicides that no one else has been able to solve. He's actually been on NBC's Dateline more than any other homicide detective in the United States because he's been able to solve homicides that are decades old. Okay. And he decided he was going to use his homicide skills, his detective skills, on the question of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ and expose that it was actually a lie. But based on his findings, he wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity, as well as several other books. And he said, no, according to my investigation, it is true. Now, he says that whenever someone has been involved in a premeditated murder, okay, there's only one of 3 reasons why someone would plan in advance to kill someone. It would be either one of these 3 reasons or a combination of 3 reasons. He says that the motive is always either or a combination of a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. These are the only 3 things that will motivate people to commit premeditated murder. And they are also the same 3 motives that will cause a person to sin or a person to lie. Either the lust of the flesh, which is a desire for sensual satisfaction, or what we call a sex motive, or the lust of the eyes, a desire for possessions or a money motive, or the pride of life, the desire for control over people, which is a power motive. So if we want to say that the New Testament writers they invented the resurrection story, they're going to have to discover either a sex, money, or a power motive. Okay, so number 1, sex. Well, is there any evidence that the New Testament writers suddenly got really popular with the women for saying that Jesus rose from the dead? Nope, not at all. Number 2, money. Is there any evidence that the New Testament writers benefited financially from saying that Jesus rose from the dead? Definitely not. Or number 3, power. Is there any evidence that the New Testament writers got power from saying that Jesus rose from the dead? Well, definitely not. In fact, just the opposite. They got persecuted, they got beaten, and eventually they all got killed. So based on the cold case method, there's absolutely no reason why any of the New Testament writers would want to spread a lie and then suffer for spreading that lie. Let's look at another argument. Eyewitness accounts. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 to 8. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ Jesus, or that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom were still living, even though some have fallen asleep, meaning they did die. Then he appeared to James and to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also as to one abnormally born. Okay, so the Apostle Paul makes it really clear that the resurrected Jesus appeared to Peter, and then at a different time to the 12 apostles, and then at a different time to a group of more than 500, and then at a different time to James, who was not even a believer until after Jesus rose from the dead. And then at a different time to Jesus, Jesus appeared to all the apostles again, and then at a different time to Paul himself. And this doesn't even include when Jesus appeared to Mary at the tomb and also to the disciples on the road to Emmaus. So in total, there are 11 recorded times that Jesus, after the resurrection, appeared to people, not including Paul. And these appearances were to men and to women, to individuals and to couples and to groups, and at least one crowd. The appearances were inside buildings, outside buildings. They were in different locations. They were different times of the day. He was physically touched. He was audibly heard. Jesus was visually seen. And he even ate food in the presence of witnesses after his resurrection. And so there's no way these were mass hallucinations. None of the witnesses believed that Jesus would rise from the dead before he even rose from the dead. There's that also. They didn't think he was going to rise from the dead. All of them knew him before he died, and so they knew he was the same Jesus who they saw on the cross and then appeared to them after it. They said, no, this is definitely the same guy. Okay? And all testified to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Christianity is based on eyewitness accounts of a resurrected Christ. Christianity is not true because a bunch of different documents were all put together and people said, well, you're expected to believe this. No, Christianity did not originate with a document, with a book. Christianity originated with an event called the resurrection. There were thousands of Christians living before even one verse of the New Testament was ever written. Why? Because they witnessed the resurrection and they wrote it down. Okay, they did not invent it, then write it down, and then believe it. Instead, they witnessed it, and then believed it, and then they wrote it down. Said another way, the New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. If there would be no New Testament documents written by the Christian Jews in the first century if Jesus had not risen from the dead. So we have the eyewitness accounts. We also have uncontested letters. Luke chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. Luke, the writer of the third gospel, said, many have undertaken to draw up an account of these things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who were the first eyewitnesses, and servants of the word. They knew him personally. Therefore, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed good also to me to write an orderly account to you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you've been taught. So Luke, he's the writer of the third gospel. He was not one of the original 12 apostles. He became a Christian sometime after the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and then he became a traveling companion of the apostle Paul. However, he decided to write a biography of the life of Jesus, and he interviewed those who were eyewitnesses of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Okay. At the same time, Matthew and John, who were eyewitnesses of the resurrection, they also wrote biographies of the life of Jesus Christ. And then we have Mark, the fourth gospel writer, who would have been a teen when Jesus rose from the dead, and he probably would have seen Jesus preaching. He also decided that he was going to write a biography of Jesus. Okay, so all four of the Gospels were written either by eyewitnesses or based upon the testimony of eyewitnesses. And these biographies were written and circulated while many of the other eyewitnesses were still alive. And these biographies also all say that Jesus rose from the dead. And these biographies are supplemented by other letters written by eyewitnesses, while many other eyewitnesses were still alive. And these letters all claim that Jesus died by crucifixion, and on the third day he rose again from the dead. Yet none of these letters were ever refuted by any of the eyewitnesses who were alive at the time. You know, all that would have taken is even one of the eyewitnesses would have said, "Hey, just a minute, that's not what happened, guys." Okay, that's all it would have taken to bring into question what was written in the Gospels. And yet no person, including no eyewitness, ever refuted anything that was written in those first letters. Another argument for the resurrection, we have the eyewitness account of John. John, in John chapter 1, verse 14 says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." Now, this eyewitness biography written by John is of extra importance. Why? Well, many people today, they claim that John's biography is of Jesus, as well as the other Gospels, are meant to be read and understood as allegories, stories, mythologies based upon symbols and metaphors. However, John clearly understood the difference between telling a historical biography and telling a story that's filled with symbol and metaphor. Remember that John wrote 2 books. He wrote the Gospel of John that very clearly claims to be a historical document. And he also wrote the book of Revelation that is clearly all about symbols and metaphors. So John is a really important witness of what happened in the death and resurrection of Jesus, because it is clear that he definitely wrote his gospel as a historical biography. Another argument is the uncontested death of Jesus. In John chapter 19, verses 33 to 35, says, "But when they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, they did not break his legs." This is the Roman guard. They did not break his legs, which they would have done if he had still been alive. They would have broken his legs, and then his chest would have sunk down, and he would have basically asphyxiated to death. But instead, verse 34, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. Very significant. The man who saw it has given testimony, and the testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe. Okay, so there is essentially absolutely no scholarly debate that Jesus did not die. Okay, all the Gospels and most of the epistles, the New Testament writers declared Jesus died on the cross. Okay. In addition, we have the eyewitness of John, who wrote that the Roman soldier pierced the side of Jesus and water and blood came out. Why is that significant? Why did they even pierce his side? Well, this was the method that the soldiers would use to determine if a person had really died by crucifixion, because if they died by crucifixion, eventually their lungs would fill up with water. And so when they would pierce through the side into a lung, out would come blood and water. And so this mixture of water and blood in the chest cavity was the best and clearest proof that a person had indeed died. And then you add to that, the Romans, really, they were experts at killing people, right? You can be sure that if a Roman soldier meant to put someone to death, they would not leave until they had confirmed that that person was indeed dead. There is no record of anyone anywhere ever surviving a full Roman crucifixion. Even the Journal of the American Medical Association on March 21st, 1986, published a peer-reviewed scientific medical study of the evidence for the death of Jesus, and they stated really clearly that the weight of the medical evidence as given in the Gospels indicates that Jesus was dead even before the wound to his side was inflicted by the Roman soldiers. There is no question Jesus died on the cross. So let's take a break there, and we'll come back